So I suppose, look, when we talk about energy systems, we're talking about energy production within the body, and energy production is relevant, obviously, to exertion, so exercise or activities. There's three ways in which energy can be produced within the body. Two of those ways are through anaerobic pathways, and anaerobic meaning that the energy is produced without the presence of oxygen. Now, we'll get into all of that maybe later on and put a little bit of context on that. I suppose that a good starting point will be to talk about what's called the phosphocreatine energy system, and I'll try and explain all three as best I can, and then put their relationship into context and how they work together. If I was to, I'm going to see the position here now. If I was to stand up, for example, that activity would be very sudden, and I suppose from a resting point of view would have an amount of intensity attached to it. I'm going from a rested state into a standing state, which requires energy for me to be able to do that. Because it's such a sudden movement, the energy that's produced will be done through the phosphocreatine system, which means that it's done so fast that it doesn't need to go through that complex process of needing oxygen in order to produce the energy to do it. So that activity for me, from sitting to standing, energy is produced rapidly for me to be able to do that. Now, from a sport performance point of view, where performance would fit in relation to that type of energy production is any activity or exercise or sport that is high in power output, but very, very short in duration. And obviously the pros to the phosphocreatine energy system is that it can produce energy rapidly, very, very quickly. It's a chemical reaction between phosphates and creatine that result in the production of ATP, and within that reaction, then energy is produced rapidly. The downside to it is that it depletes very, very quickly. So this is why we can't, we can't do all-out sprints for maybe more than 10 or 12 seconds. And sports such as the 100-meter sprint, for example, the shot put, the javelin throw, the long jump, the high jump, would all rely heavily and predominantly on the phosphocreatine energy system. And as I said, one of the downsides to that is that energy and ATP can be depleted really, really quickly. The second energy system, also staying within the anaerobic pathways, is called the anaerobic glycolytic system. And that system looks after energy production. And again, there's a lot of variability in this, Jamie. These are kind of general guidelines depending on the athlete's training status and their fitness levels. But generally, the glycolytic energy system will look after energy production from anywhere from that 10 seconds on to give or take maybe a minute and a half or more, depending on the fitness levels of the athlete. And like the phosphocreatine system, it can produce energy very, very quickly. I think it's about 3 to 4 times faster than the aerobic system, which we'll be discussing in a couple of minutes. Again, there's a downside to the anaerobic glycolytic system in that, like the phosphocreatine system, energy stores can be depleted very, very quickly. And from a sports performance point of view, this is where I suppose combat sport is very relevant, because we would rely heavily on the anaerobic glycolytic system. We would rely a lot on all three of them, but again, depending on, I suppose, the training status of the athlete, the anaerobic glycolytic system would be one of the energy pathways that would fuel a performance within combat sport. The third energy production system, known as the oxidative phosphorylation system, or the aerobic energy pathway, looks after exercise and activity that's relatively low in intensity but long in duration. So walking, for example, would be one of them. Jogging, depending again on your status, a jog for me at the moment might be a little bit more than moderate intensity, but you get my meaning.
I do.
The pros and cons to the aerobic system, I suppose the pros is that there is an abundance of energy reserves for aerobic exercise. That's why we can walk for long distances, right? And if you're relatively fit, you can jog for long distances at low intensity. The downside to the aerobic system is that it's a very complex, drawn out process for where energy is produced. And this is why the higher intensity, high power output activities tend to switch away from the aerobic system, because it needs the energy demand, it needs to meet the energy demand much quicker than the aerobic energy system can do it. So that's the three kind of very general, very simplified overview of what the energy systems do and their function. One of the important things to remember with the energy systems, and this is often put out as a myth, that the energy systems kind of work independently of each other, which is not true whatsoever. They work absolutely interdependent, and they rely and overlap on each other as intensities are increased and decreased. So from a combat sport point of view, we need to really understand that from a performance perspective and from a training perspective, all three of those energy systems are functioning at any one time in order to fuel us for a performance, if that makes sense.